Good morning, Oasis family, friends, and guests. It's great to have you joining us here this morning, and we always want to encourage you to get in the comments below this video and say hello to one another and let us know that you're watching. We have some announcements for the week, and then we can continue on in our service. Currently, our food pantry runs on a bi-weekly basis. The next food share will be Saturday, February 6th, from 10:30 a.m. to 11:45 a.m. Our food gets set up outside under the covered walkway. We do ask that you wear masks and remain socially distant from any others who are also present at the food share. If you or anyone you know is in need of food in between food shares, please feel free to reach out to us. You can contact us through our Facebook page, through our website, or by calling our church office. This food pantry is one of our strongest ministries for serving our community, and we want to help in any way that we can. Every Thursday evening, we host a prayer service video on our Facebook page. This is just a brief time for us to be able to pray over the needs of our community, our church members, our country, and even our world. If you have any requests you would like prayed over, you can leave them in the comments during a prayer service video. You can message us through Facebook, or you can contact us through our website. We hope you'll join us this Thursday at 6 p.m. on our Facebook page. For our members who financially contribute to the church, we do have 2 digital options for you to be able to continue to give. If you go to our website, oasisconwaygardens.org, there is a tab that says Give. Under that tab, you'll see the 2 options of Give Online or Give by Text. You'll also see a third option that says Give by Mail. The instructions on how to follow through with each of these are listed there under the Give tab. Don't forget to stay connected with us through social media. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube under the name Oasis at Conway Gardens, and you can also find our website at oasisconwaygardens.org. You can stay updated on all things Oasis and our ministries through our Facebook page and through our website. You can also view our current and past sermon videos through all 3 of our accounts: Facebook, YouTube, and our website.
Hi, church. I want to let you know that beginning on February 7th, we're planning a new series on Sunday mornings here at Oasis at Conway Gardens Church in Orlando, Florida. It seems more difficult than ever to live out our Christian life while living in the world. I say seem because there have been other times in history and in other countries where it's been worse than what we have. But the scripture is pretty clear that in this life you will have trouble. But don't be overcome, because I have overcome the world. Those are the words of Jesus in John 16. So how do you live in the world and stay close to Christ when there's so much going on around us? That's going to be the topic of this series on spiritual healthy habits, things you can do in some habitual way that help you to maintain your closer walk with God. I want to give you a heads up before February 7th so that you can prepare if you'd like. I'm suggesting this book, The Life You've Always Wanted by John Ortberg, Ortberg, John Ortberg. This edition, which is the preferable edition, is from 2002, and it's published by Zondervan Publishers. You can get it very inexpensively on the internet, used if you like. I'm a lover of used books, but it's such a popular book that the price has come down. I consider this book in the top 5 books I've ever read, ever. And it is super easy reading. It's sort of like Spiritual Habits for Dummies. Not that you're dummies or I am, but sometimes we feel that way. Secondly, I want to recommend another book to you. I will say this first book will mirror the sermon series slightly. There'll be portions of the sermon series that won't come out of this book or won't match up, but it'll mirror slightly. And so if you just want to stay involved with the sermon series, this is the book to get. And then if you just want some fuel for your devotional time with Christ, this is my number 1 recommendation. Devotional Classics, edited by Richard Foster and James Bryan Smith. Now, I have the 1993 edition, which I bought as a textbook in seminary, and it was published by Harper San Francisco. Really, it's published by a Christian group called Renover, but they use the publishing company Harper San Francisco. There is a newer edition out, the 2005 edition, published by HarperCollins, and I'm not sure if it has the same editor with Richard Foster. I might glance here a minute while I'm videoing, but I didn't plan that part so well. The value of this book, however, is that if you struggle with having some habitual prayer and reading time with God, this is so good. Why do I say that? Because it's not based on reading the scriptures or having a devotional time every single day. It is based off of a weekly devotional. I just glanced, and it does have the same editors, Richard J. Foster and James Bryan Smith. So this book is set up as 52 devotional readings from Christians throughout history, trying to point here to classics. It's not bound by any denomination. It's bound by the heart of the gospel. And you read one devotional a week, and you return to it and ponder it during the week. And it even has some things to ponder and do during the week if you'd like some things to help you do this. I've read portions of this 2 and 3 times, and it was very influential in my life. Well, there you go. 2 books. The Life You've Always Wanted by John Ortberg, 2005 edition, and Devotional Classics by Richard Foster and James Bryan Smith, either the 1993 or the 2005 edition. Actually, I made a mistake. This is 2002. I should add also, there's a workbook that goes along with Ortberg's book. If you want the workbook, by all means get it. But it's very easy to purchase the workbook when you intend to get the actual book. So make sure when you order, you don't mistakenly get the workbook when you want the actual primary text. We'll see you February 7th right here when we begin our series on spiritually healthy habits.
Thanks again for joining us this morning. We hope you have a great week and join us again next Sunday.
We wanted to give another announcement today. By now you've noticed a guest, Jeremy Morada, helping us with our worship the last couple of Sundays. Well, he's back with us today and a little bit more involved. The reason is because Jeremy is applying to be our next worship pastor. So as you worship the Lord today with Jeremy leading, please be in prayer with us about the possible future of Jeremy at Oasis at Conway Gardens.
Good morning, Oasis Church. I just invite you to worship with us as we sing a few songs. This is We Fall Down, followed by Refiner's Fire, and then At Calvary. We fall down, we lay our crowns at the feet of Jesus. The greatness of mercy and love ready to do your will. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified, knowing not it was for me he died on Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Verse 2. By God's word at last my sin I learned. Then I trembled at the law I spurned, till my guilty soul imploring turned to Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Now I've given to Jesus everything. Now I gladly owe him as my King. Now my raptured soul can only sing of Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Oh, the love that true salvation's plan. Oh, the grace that brought it down to man. Oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. Mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary. Mercy, mercy there was great and grace was free. Pardon there was multiplied to me. There my burdened soul found liberty at Calvary.
Good morning. I'm Eric Loudermilk, interim pastor at Oasis at Conway Gardens Church here in Orlando, Florida. Welcome to our series, Historic Heroes of the Cruciform Life, a complete life lived for Christ. This is a series we're doing in the year 2021 of 12 messages, one message the last Sunday of each month. We'll be taking a historic figure in history, someone who followed Jesus and lived out the cruciform life. Early in church history, the word cruciform referred to the architectural layout of a church building when the church would be built in the shape of a cross. As time progressed, however, Christians began to use the term Cruciform, to refer to the kind of life that mimicked the life Jesus demonstrated when he gave his life for us on the cross, a life of submission and humility, a complete life lived for Christ. Our Bible passage for this series will be Luke 10:27, when Jesus asks an expert of the law, "What are the greatest commandments?" And the expert replies, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." A couple of other passages in 1 Corinthians I want to highlight. 1 Corinthians 10:24, "Do not seek your own good, but the good of the other person." 1 Corinthians 6, verse 7, the second half of the verse. "Why not be wronged? Why not rather be cheated?" We'll look at some people who would rather suffer harm than bring dishonor to the name of Jesus or to bring problems to other people. Or 1 Corinthians 10:31, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God." These are followers of Jesus, whom we've noted as putting Christ first, putting others second only after Christ, and who were therefore willing to live a life that stood out in contrast to the culture around them. Sometimes that's different from secular culture. Sometimes that's different from political culture in specific. When we look at Dietrich Bonhoeffer, we'll see that. Sometimes it's different from church culture. When we look at John Wesley, we'll see that. Sometimes it's different from popular culture. And when we hear about G.K. Chesterton, we'll see that. Sometimes it's even different from the going trend in education. And when we look at Abraham Kuyper, we'll see that. Now you may be saying, why this series? Well, 1 Peter calls the Old Testament character Lot a, quote, righteous man tormented in his soul by the culture around him. I believe that in any generation and culture, Christians are always, in some degree, similar to Lot. You see, Lot was the character in Sodom and Gomorrah whom Abraham argued with God over to release or save from the coming destruction based on his righteousness. And yet, even though Lot was righteous and he was saved from the judgment on those two towns, he was so blinded by the culture around him that he thought it would be acceptable to give his daughters up for rape rather than allow the men of the city to rape his two guests. Yes, that's a bit extreme. But in some way, we're always affected by the culture around us. All the New Testament letters, except for 2, were written to address church problems. And sometimes those problems came when the Christians could not distinguish between following Jesus and living in contrast or living with the culture around them. Sometimes we think things are acceptable when they're not. So we're taking a look at 12 figures in history who followed Jesus in a very thoughtful way. They put Christ first, they put others first, and they lived a life that stood out in contrast to the culture around them. Each of the 12 figures we're bringing to you will emphasize one or more parts of this description well. And hopefully, looking at their lives will help us to make a comparative second look at how we're living today in our communities and seek out new ways to model our own lives after the cruciform life that Jesus Christ lived and died for us. Let's get started.
Who am I?
Dr. Bonhoeffer?
Yes?
Until further notice, you're forbidden to speak in public, to publish your writings, and to teach.
We are at war.
I swear to be true and obedient, Führer of the German Reich, Adolf Hitler, to abide by the law and fulfill my duty, so help me God.
On the outbreak of war, the Jews will be exterminated without a trace.
I'm afraid we can't afford to bury our heads in the sand.
Oh, God.
So many lies. So much deception.
You're asking me to be a spy?
Put you in prison, Dietrich. You know that.
We've got to get rid of Hitler.
If your resistance are going to act, they must act now.
There is men with power and influence who have made careful plans for a government after Hitler's assassination.
Assassination? You speak so freely of murder.
It failed.
I have a search warrant.
The Gestapo's taking the Abwehr to pieces. But Hans kept a dossier. For after the war.
Is Dietrich named?
Yes.
My God.
You're here to tell the truth.
I did not resist the state. I resisted the state's takeover of the church.
Word of advice, be careful about being so smart. People start to believe you think you're better than them. Nobody likes that.
You lied to me! All the time you knew!
You'll see where your God gets you now.
Please, Dietrich, don't win the war only to lose your soul.
Whoever I am, you know, dear God, I shall always belong to you.
So who was Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor, theologian, writer, and member of the German resistance movement under Hitler's Third Reich. He was a prolific writer of Christian devotional and theological books, many of which are in print today. Dietrich was born on February 9th, 1906 in what was then Breslau, Germany, now part of Poland. He was one of 8 children born to his father Karl Bonhoeffer and mother Paula Bonhoeffer, née von Haas. Both parents were educated and valued education, family, as well as music. In fact, Bonhoeffer was such a skilled pianist that he could have gone into a professional music career. His entire family, however, grew up in and was embroiled in Nazi Germany. 4 sisters he had, and yet 2 of them lost their husbands' lives at the hands of Nazi executionists. Bonhoeffer completed his education early. He was a bit of a child prodigy, growing up in a home that sort of on-ramped him to the educational system. He completed his equivalent of a bachelor and master's degree in theology very early on, and then completed his full first doctorate of theology at the ripe young age of age 21 in 1927 from the University of Berlin. I think that's half the age of what I was when I finished mine. In 1930, at age 24, he was too young to be ordained into ministry. So he traveled to the U.S. to continue his theological training at Union Theological Seminary in New York. While he was there, he rubbed shoulders with many young black seminarians and fell in love with the black church experience. He loved to attend the Black Abyssinian Baptist Church of Harlem. And of his time there, he wrote, "Here one can truly speak and hear about sin and grace and the love of God. Christ is preached with rapturous passion and vision." 2 interesting anecdotes from that time. Bonhoeffer actually fell just head over heels in love with black spirituals and bought several albums which he took back with him to Germany. It's hard to imagine an erudite German theologian listening to that. He also did not have a driver's license before he came to the U.S., and it took him 3 tries to pass the test. Well, eventually he returned to Germany in 1931 and was appointed lecturer of theology at the University of Berlin. Now, we don't exactly know when Dietrich converted to Christ, but it may have happened after his return from New York. Now that may seem odd, but it wasn't uncommon at all, especially in Germany, for young men to study theology for its intellectual pursuits and not necessarily be followers of Christ. But historians believe that somehow, after that return from New York, he moved from being a lofty theologian to a man who intensely followed the way of Jesus and the way of the cross. Eventually, he was ordained on November 15th, 1931. And a year later, in 1932, there was a vote in Germany on the new leadership of the church, the German church. Well, Bonhoeffer strongly opposed the pro-Nazi candidates that had been put forth. You see, this was thought to have been a rigged election. But despite his efforts and those of others, these pro-Nazi leaders were voted in, and this marked a significant change in the history of what would later be called the Deutsche Christen movement, the German National Church. To give you an idea of how things progressed from there, roughly a year later, late 1933, this new national church voted to apply the Arian paragraph to church policies. The Arian paragraph, if you're not familiar with this, quote, reserved membership and or right of residence solely for members of the Aryan race. You remember those, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired ideal race of Germany. It, quote, excluded from such rights any non-Aryans, particularly those of Jewish or Slavic descent, end quote. So this, resulted in the removal of pastors and other leaders from church positions who just happened to be born Jewish. Later, Hitler himself was installed as Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. So all of this was growing and boiling up. Well, 2 days after Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany, Bonhoeffer had been seeing this coming, and he delivered a national radio address calling out the worship of the Führer, that's German for leader, as idolatrous. They were worshiping the Führer. And this idolatry, he said, would eventually evolve to the point where the Führer would become the Verführer, or misleader, someone who seduces and deceives the people. What a prophecy. Well, just as Bonhoeffer's radio speech was getting to the heart of his message, speakers around Germany, radio sets, went silent. To this day, no one knows exactly who pulled the plug or who delivered the order, but it is widely assumed that that order came from Nazi leadership. Well, later in 1933, Dietrich was offered a position in a national church in Berlin. But in protest of the national church movement, he turned it down. The church at this point was basically led by the Führer himself, Adolf Hitler. Eventually, a new movement in Germany began, a new church movement, which was known in English as the Confessing Church. This new church movement eventually adopted its own theological document. Through trial and error, these things take some time. But they boldly declared some things. Here's a few of them. Number one, the source of revelation is only the Word of God, Jesus Christ himself. Any other sources, earthly powers, for example, will not be accepted. Another statement, Jesus Christ is the only Lord of all aspects of personal life. There should be no other authority. The message and order of the church should not be influenced by the current political convictions. So this is a strong statement going on at that time. And another one, the church should not be ruled by a leader. Remember, that's the English word for Führer. There is no hierarchy in the church, and it's not led by Adolf Hitler. Well, this was the Confessing Church's beliefs, and a new movement had begun. Well, eventually, Bonhoeffer was a world traveler, and he took a German-speaking church post in London so he could serve German people, but he was not under the thumb of the German National Church. So he physically left his country, but he did not leave Germany in his heart. He continued communicating and working with the confessing church, even racking up a huge phone bill to try and help those confessing church leaders in Germany follow Jesus and live out that life in the midst of that tension in their culture. He eventually came back to Germany, and he worked in underground seminaries. You see, this confessing church was eventually outlawed by the Gestapo in 1937, and pastors and former students began to be arrested. To get around this, Bonhoeffer secretly traveled from one city and one town and one village to another, visiting students in different homes of wealthy supporters. One author called it Seminary on the Run, where this bright young follower of Jesus would daily risk his life to train future pastors and teachers so that they could proclaim the life-giving story of Jesus to Germans who were suffering under Hitler's evil regime. Well, finally, in 1939, Bonhoeffer returned to the U.S. You say, well, why would he do that? Well, he went there to work for the seminary again, and part of his reason was due to his concerns over being drafted into the military. Now, Bonhoeffer was a pacifist in theory at that time, but we'll find out later he was not opposed to doing what had to be done. What his real concern right now with the draft is that if he was drafted into Hitler's military machine, he would have to carry out death in the name of Adolf Hitler, and he could not be a part of that program of destruction. But just 2 weeks after coming to the U.S., Dietrich knew he had made a wrong choice. And his reasoning was this, and this is a very important part of the message. Bonhoeffer reasoned, I'm a Christian, I'm a German. Hitler, the leader of Germany, is murdering scores of people. I cannot, therefore, as a German Christian, stand by and do nothing. Let me repeat that. I am a German, I'm a Christian. Hitler, the leader of Germany, is murdering scores of people. I cannot, therefore, as a German Christian, stand by and do nothing. So he returned to the U.S. And so when he did, his friends who were a part of the German resistance movement obtained membership for him into the Abwehr, which was a German military group, an intelligence group. You might wonder how this person who's already been marked as a resistor was able to get in. Well, they used the logic that Dietrich's far and wide international contacts in the ecumenical church could be used to support the country, while in fact they did support the country, but not Hitler's aims. This group used Dietrich's travels to build support abroad among the Allies for the German resistance group. And eventually, it was this same group that devised the assassination plans on Hitler's life for 1943 and 1944. Eventually, there was an attempt in July of 1944, and you may be aware of this from the movie Valkyrie, in which Tom Cruise stars. But that's not discovered right now. But by being a part of this group, Dietrich is implicating himself as a co-conspirator on these plans on Hitler's life. Well, eventually, Bonhoeffer is arrested by the Gestapo on suspicions and being an enemy of the state, but his connections to the assassination plots are not known yet. Nazi officials suspected more, but did not have evidence. So Bonhoeffer spent the next 2 years in Nazi imprisonment in about 4 different prisons and concentration camps. And here's what's so amazing. During this time, he became known as the pastor to other prisoners and even to the guards. He would console and pray with them and teach them as they feared for their lives and even their souls as Allied bombs were dropped nearby. 2 years went by, moving from one confinement to another, loving, serving, and pastoring those around him. Eventually, though, secret documents of the Abwehr were found, and Hitler learned of the direct connection of the Abwehr and the plots on his life. And he immediately ordered the death of all the conspirators. So, sadly, on April 9th, 1945, at Flossenburg concentration camp, just 3 weeks before Hitler himself committed suicide, and only a short 2 weeks before U.S. forces liberated that camp, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was hung by the neck until dead. One of the last things Bonhoeffer was noted for saying was when he knew his execution was very imminent, he said the following: "This is the end. For me, though, the beginning of life." You see, what we learn from Dietrich Bonhoeffer is the life lived on earth here is a life in preparation of union with Christ. And the life we're to live here is one of a cruciform life, a life that is shaped similar to the life of Jesus on the cross. Dietrich Bonhoeffer indeed went through the refiner's fire, and he came out giving us an excellent model of life. A human life, yes. People rage and debate whether he really was a pacifist and so forth. People debate whether or not he was right. But Bonhoeffer reasoned it like this: if I'm riding in a car with an intoxicated driver, and I see a little girl playing on the side of the road, and the driver is veering over there, do I not have a responsibility to grab the wheel, even if violently, and jerk the car back on the road? And it was because of that reasoning that he decided to take action that cost his life. His life was shaped so similarly to the life Jesus lived on the cross, a cruciform life. He put Christ first, he put others first, and he was willing to live a life that stood out in stark contrast to the culture around him.
Prisoner strip.
You tremble, Pastor. Afraid? I'm cold. So, this is the end. No.
Father, give unto thy servants that peace which the world cannot give.
Well, that is just a smattering of events and of the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I'd like to recommend, if you are interested,
some follow-up sources before we have some wrap-up thoughts. Probably the best thing I've ever read or seen for grasping the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer is the movie Bonhoeffer, Agent of Grace. In getting ready for this message today, I went to review the film thinking it would be on Netflix. But in fact, it is free on YouTube, evidently sponsored by a foundation. I'll put the link in the comments on Facebook and in YouTube at this point in the message on Sunday morning. Bonhoeffer, Agent of Grace. Great movie. If you're a big reader, this is the latest thing out on Bonhoeffer that has been very popular. I think I'm holding it, maybe just the angle, it looks bigger than it is. Here's a big book to read. Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, and Spy by Eric Metaxas. If you are an avid reader like Darlene Ketzel, you would love this book. It's very, very good. But I didn't start in there. I actually started with this book, Life Together. This Bonhoeffer wrote about Christian community for the seminaries. Now, this is actually very short, but it's a little bit theologically heady. So that's not my favorite. This is my favorite. This is Letters and Papers from Prison, and it was written over 2 years. So for myself, to try to experience and understand what he was going through, I read one letter a night. And basically went through the process that he was going through in prison over generally the same time. And it was very easy reading, one letter at a time. And what you're going to find out is Bonhoeffer was a man, a human, just like you and I, and he had trials and sufferings. There's a great poem that I wanted to add to the message called Who Am I, that he wrote in prison, but I don't think we have time. Now, this is an older version, but this is actually Bonhoeffer's most popular and most well-known book, The Cost of Discipleship, in which Bonhoeffer talks about following Jesus but not attempting to live a life that matches up to the cross. Now, in Letters and Papers in Prison, Bonhoeffer later writes that this can be taken out of context to the point of not living under grace. But he still stood by his work. We are saved by grace, by Christ's work on the cross, but something must happen in us, and that we live a life that is serious about following Jesus. So what have we learned today? Well, I want you to think of two main things. Number one, Bonhoeffer put Christ first and himself third, others second. He literally gave Christ his all. And it was a gradual process. He didn't come to that overnight when he first decided to follow Jesus. He slowly saw the pain and decided to put Christ first. And he lived in contrast to the culture around him. He didn't live angrily against culture. He lived gently in contrast to the culture around him. That's number one. He put Christ first, and he submissively lived in contrast to the culture around him. He stood out. And number two, and perhaps more poignantly right now for what's going on in our country, Bonhoeffer refused to confuse the patriotism of his country with the way of the cross. You see, there are forms of extreme patriotism among Christians that can lead to extreme Christian nationalism or things like that. C.S. Lewis himself wrote on the limits of patriotism. We should support and pray for and vote for the strength and peace and stability of our nation. But that nation is not the source of our faith. And that nation is not to live above and over and ruling the rest of the world. The way of the cross is a way of humility. And part of Bonhoeffer's own humility and willingness to give his life was for his nation. But he didn't give his life in angry violence. He gave it in very submissive ways that eventually endorsed violence as the very last thing to do. There was no other choice. And so today we leave you with the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a cruciform life, a complete life. I want to close with two quotes from Bonhoeffer, and I just think these are really, really good. The first is this: one act of obedience is better than 100 sermons. One act of obedience is better than 100 sermons. And gentle, small acts of obedience, like caring for someone who's in fear, as he did in prison. And then the last is this: to endure the cross is not tragedy. It is the suffering which is the fruit of an exclusive allegiance to Jesus Christ. To endure the cross is not tragedy. It is the suffering which is the fruit of an exclusive allegiance to Jesus Christ. I hope you have a good week, and I look forward to seeing you on the next installment of this series on the last weekend in February, when my friend Miguel Benitez will bring us a message on G.K. Chesterton. I think you'll enjoy that. Have a good week.
Let's sing this song, Holy Spirit, and ask God to be in our hearts this morning. There's nothing worth more that will ever come close. Nothing can compare. You're our living hope. Your presence, Lord. I've tasted and seen of the sweetest of loves, where my heart becomes free and my shame is undone. In your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for, to be overcome by your presence, Lord. Your presence, Lord. There's nothing worth more that will ever come close. Nothing can compare. You're our living hope. Your presence, Lord. I've tasted and seen of the sweetest of loves, where my heart becomes free and my shame is undone. In your presence, Lord. Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, you are welcome here. Come flood this place and fill the atmosphere. Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for, to be overcome by your presence, Lord. Your presence, Lord. Let us become more aware of your presence. Let us experience the glory of your